welcome. We've got a whole lot of things to talk about today, and I want to give a little shout out to our movie In Our Hand about the taking of the Temple Mount and all that by the Israelis. Scored #3 box office in the nation with a limited number of screens, #3 across the nation. And that is good, and they're going to have another showing because it was so well received. Now, there's something called the Congressional Budget Office. It doesn't have a good track record of forecasting anything, especially about health care. They have been wildly off in recommending how many people are going to be enrolled under Obamacare and how many actually are. I mean, they're 100% or more off, but yet they have said, okay, under the proposal by the Republicans, there'll be just several million people, millions will be uninsured. Well, that really isn't the truth because their estimates are off. But nevertheless, their scoring is taken as gospel, and of course the left is just jumping up and down on it. But the real story is that Obamacare is desperately failing, and people's premiums have just gone through the roof. They've skyrocketed. It's hurting people. It has to be repealed, and it has to be replaced.
So now Republicans in the Senate will be working on their own health care plan after the House passed its bill. Gary Lane brings us the story.
The new CBO estimate says 23 million Americans would be left uninsured, although that number includes people who simply wouldn't buy insurance because they wouldn't be forced to the way they were under Obamacare. Democrats continued their attack on the Republican plans. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called the bill, already approved by the House, a nightmare.
The report makes clear Trump care would be a cancer on the American health care system.
When House Republicans passed health care reform last month, the GOP and President Trump said they had to act because Obamacare is failing.
This is a repeal and a replace of Obamacare.
Under Obamacare, government exchanges in many states are offering people few options. In some cases, only one insurance provider. One latest example, after incurring Obamacare losses of $100 million, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas City will pull out of multiple counties in Kansas and Missouri next year. The Congressional Budget Office says the House reform bill would actually save the government money by reducing the federal deficit by $119 billion over the next 10 years, while also cutting taxes by nearly $1 trillion and reducing spending by more than $1 trillion. The CBO also says states would be allowed to waive pre-existing condition requirements. Some Senate Republicans say they'll need to change that.
We've got to deal with pre-existing conditions in a way that we know will actually work for people.
While some people would see their costs rise, Republicans say healthy people will actually see their premiums reduced because they won't be forced to accept plans that cover services they don't need. Republicans and critics point out the CBO has often been wrong in its forecasts, and the CBO itself warns that its projections are uncertain. While many Republicans may take issue with the CBO estimates, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is pleased the report is finally done.
The updated report will allow the Senate procedurally to move forward.
McConnell doubts he has the 50 votes right now he needs to repeal Obamacare. The Senate is expected to redo the House bill and come up with its own measure in the days ahead. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Well, we'll wait and see, but I tell you, it's got to be fixed and quickly. I don't think the American people can wait any longer. And if Congress doesn't do it, they might not be in office after the next elections because this is a major factor in many, many people's budget. Well, Congress is getting ready to work on another very important measure, the new federal budget. Democrats blasted the president's budget plan. The Republicans say it's moving in the right direction. Congress is also taking on another major issue right now, one of the biggest and fastest growing crimes in the world, human trafficking. Abigail Robertson brings us that.
It's estimated that more than 20 million people worldwide are victims of human trafficking, with cases reported in every state in the U.S.
So many times you find it around the world, but it's right here in America. They have more than 7,000 cases just last year reported.
This week, Congress focused in on this issue, passing a number of bills aimed at protecting victims and increasing punishments for convicted offenders. A top priority, dealing with legal loopholes that predators take advantage of to avoid being convicted. Congresswoman Martha Roby's Global Child Protection Act would change current laws to close those loopholes.
Under the current definitions, it does deal with people who travel abroad to have sex with children, but the definitions don't include people who travel abroad to force children to do sexual acts on them. And so it's these types of, again, unintentional loopholes in the criminal code where Congress can change the law.
And Congressman Mike Johnson is also offering a measure that would prevent criminals from getting away on a technicality. Johnson's bill deals with a case in 2015 where a man who recorded a sexual assault on a child was able to escape a federal conviction.
There's a provision where the courts have said that if a predator has sexual activity with a minor and they record any of those images on their phone, their smartphone, their other devices, and they didn't intend to record them, then somehow they would be able to evade prosecution. We think that's outrageous. It's a violation of Congress's obvious intent to protect the most defenseless among us.
And Congress has another major item on its plate with the release of President Trump's budget plan of over $4 trillion.
The budget's a framework, and what's so refreshing here is how honest he is in the process, that he balances a budget in 10 years. We have not had that in the last administration.
The White House budget reduces Washington's spending plans for future years, and Democrats quickly attacked the proposal, with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer calling it a nightmare that hurts the middle class and relies on fantasy numbers. And while not all Republicans gave it a ringing endorsement, many are encouraged to see the Trump administration taking steps to try to limit spending, eventually balance the budget, and help get the economy growing strongly.
When I look at what he's doing else in the budget, it's kind of what he's looking at: welfare reform, actually putting people back to work, giving them a sense of accomplishment at the same time. Those are tough things to do, and sometimes they get politically attacked for it, but in the end, you create and help individuals to buy homes, send their kids to college.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the president's budget is just a recommendation, and now it's up to Congress to figure out what to do with it. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, with us now from Washington is Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse. He's written a new book. It's called The Vanishing American Adult: Our Coming-of-Age Crisis and How to Build a Culture of Self-Reliance. Senator, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. Good to be with you.
You know, this book, something jumped at me. You're talking about these young people, and they just don't really want to work. But you had an example. They were decorating a Christmas tree, and they could get to the lower level of it, and then they walked away and said, well, the job's done. Well, half of the tree that they couldn't reach wasn't decorated. And that sort of speaks to the whole culture. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I was 37 when I became a college president, and I didn't think of myself as that much older than the undergraduates at our school. But I quickly realized that one of the most basic differences between me growing up in the 1970s and 80s and a lot of the students that were entering college the last few years is when I was in high school, everybody I grew up around, whether they were going to college or not, and everybody that I got to college with, whether they'd come from a poor family or a working class family like mine, or if they were wealthier, they had all worked before. And the vast majority of kids entering colleges today have tended to grow up in households that are so insulated from work that they often just haven't had the experience of developing a work ethic. Well, what I found at this, the story you tell about the Christmas tree, is we had a big athletic arena at the college that I was president of. About a 20-foot Christmas tree was to be set up around Thanksgiving for the Christmas holiday that year. And our students, and these were strong and able, vital and vibrant students, they were supposed to decorate the Christmas tree, and they ended up decorating the bottom 8 feet. They used up all the decorations, and then they were leaving. And one of the vice presidents of our college walked by, and she said, "What's going on here, guys?" And they said, "Well, we didn't know how to get any higher, so we just decorated the bottom, and we used up the decorations, and we're done." And she said, "Wait a minute, did maintenance refuse to bring you a ladder?" And it turned out none of them had even thought to ask. They just didn't take the next step of problem solving. And I think we have a lot of kids right now that we're stranding in Neverland. We're getting them stuck in perpetual adolescence, and it's not good for them, and it's not good for us in a republic. We need to do better by the kids.
Well, what's the answer, do you think?
I think one thing is we need to celebrate scar tissue more with our kids. When you're growing up, there are all sorts of things that happen as you're taking off the training wheels as you go through adolescence. You know, it's important to protect little kids when they're, you know, at a stage of dependency. But as they migrate toward adulthood, our goal as parents and as grandparents and aunts and uncles is to help them take off the training wheels so they can become independent, so they can live a life of gratitude to God by trying to serve their neighbor and do meaningful work in the community. And a lot of that growing up, a lot of those rites of passage, a lot of that coming of age involves some scabs and some scar tissue and some tough love. And right now, I think we're doing a bad job as the parents and the grandparents generation of trying to protect our kids too much from a lot of the character building grit that comes from those transitional states. Scar tissue is the foundation of future character, and we're not celebrating it enough with our kids. They can be resilient, but we need to help them know that they can.
How about all this minimum wage? You know, when I was a kid, I worked on a farm, and I got paid, I think, $15 a month. And I mean, I was working. You talk about work. You start at 5:30 in the morning, and you knock off about 9 o'clock at night. I mean, it was tough work, and I was just a kid. But I got $15. I mean, what is this stuff if they have to get $15 an hour or $13 an hour minimum wage?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I wrote The Vanishing American Adult primarily to be constructive. 1/3 of the book is looking at this problem of perpetual adolescence, but 2/3 of it is about what habits can we help inculcate in our kids. And you point to one of the central ones, which is, as parents, we need to have a theory and a plan for how we're going to help our kids get a work ethic. Because most kids don't grow up around farms anymore. Where I'm from in Nebraska, we still bus kids out in the summer to the fields to detassel corn. So there are some of those opportunities in parts of the country, but most American kids are growing up in suburbs now, and we, the parents, need to plan to get them a work ethic, and that's what The Vanishing American Adult is really about.
Well, let me show this book, where it's available right now wherever books are sold. It's called The Vanishing American Adult. Let me ask you you know, I hear Chuck Schumer speaking, and I would think that hell for him would be to listen to the nonsense that he speaks over and over and over again for all eternity. Why do they want to attack everything the president does?
Well, there are a whole bunch of people in Washington, D.C. who are confused, and this is probably true in both political parties. They get confused and they start to think that Washington, D.C. is the center of the world, and we don't believe that. Christians don't believe that, and Americans broadly don't believe that. But unfortunately, 5 of the 7 richest counties in America now are the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where the lobbyists live. You've got Manhattan, San Francisco, and 5 counties around Washington, D.C. A river of money flows to this place, and that's not what the founders intended. The American people believe, like the founders believe, that whatever small town or whatever urban ethnic neighborhood you're living in, whatever suburb you live in, you're supposed to think that's the center of the world, because that's where you work, and that's where you worship, and that's where you're joining the Rotary Club, and that's where you're raising kids. That's supposed to be the center of the world, and we have too many politicians that are confused, and they think that heaven can come by politics in Washington, D.C., and it's not true.
You're absolutely right. 3 big things. You got tax reform. You've got the Obamacare repeal and replace, and you've got the budget. Comment on how are we going to handle that?
Yeah, so Washington is not very good at telling the truth about long-term problems, and all 3 of those that you name are big and long-term problems. So maybe just a brief comment on each. American healthcare is one of the only sectors of the economy where we don't get higher quality for lower cost over time, and we should ask why that is. It isn't because we have too little government. It's because we've already had too much government perverting our healthcare delivery system and trying to get in the way between doctors and nurses and their patients. So we need to do healthcare reform that actually tries to put doctors and nurses and patients and families back in the center of the equation. We need to have a system where lots of Americans know they've got insurance against a catastrophic event, but mostly we don't need more government intrusion in the healthcare system, and that's why we need to repeal and fully replace Obamacare. Second, on tax reform, there are so many loopholes and carve-outs and special exemptions for the lobbyists and the politically connected and the powerful, and what the American people want is is a simpler tax code. We could lower the marginal rate as long as we would carve out lots of these loopholes and carve-outs for the politically connected. The American people know that Washington exists to provide for the common defense. The American people want to pay their taxes that go to the troops and go to national security, but there's just so much muck and slosh around this place. We need to do fundamental tax reform. And then third, you point to the budget. You know, this is a city that hasn't done honest budgeting for 4 decades now. 35 of the last 39 years, less than 30% of all federal spending has gone through the budget process. Almost every year, these people get to the end of the fiscal year. They get to September, and the government's about to shut down, and then they scream that the only 2 choices are shut down the government and fund nothing, or grow all government spending another 2 or 3% next year. That doesn't make any sense. I'm one of 5 people in the U.S. Senate that's never been a politician before. As you mentioned, I was a college president before, and that's why I wrote The Vanishing American Adult, because most of the important questions in American life are upstream from politics. We need politics to do a smaller number of things, and we need a budget that reflects a politics that does a smaller number of things, but the more important things more urgently.
Well, Senator, I appreciate that, the wisdom as you're showing, and may your colleagues acknowledge some of it as being the gospel truth. Well, the book is called The Vanishing American Adult, The Coming of Age Crisis and How to Build a Culture of Self-Reliance. You can get that book at your online or at your bookstore.